I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day. The second of Hopkins. Just incredible, terrible sonnets that I teach on the course. You know, when you're writing about this guy, you're going to write about the contrast in tone between, you know, those celebration poems, spring, God's grandeur, the wind hover, and these incredibly dark and melancholy poems. But what you'll say is that, you know, regardless of the subject matter, regardless of the experiences being captured in the poems, the language is magical. The control, the imagination, the creativity is unendingly impressive. This is another sonnet, as I mentioned before, and it is a sonnet in which we're going to see some things that are very typical of this poet's work. We see the use of alliteration, feel, fell, dark, day, what, ways, went. We see the bones built, dull, dough, blood, brimmed, flesh filled. We see the use of repetition, cries, cries. So in terms of the form of Hopkins' poetry, yeah, he uses sprung rhythm. We'll talk about that in a different video. You'll see that video on your drop-down list. He uses language in a way which is tremendously original and creative. But in these poems, it's the emotional honesty that really is striking. In the last poem, in the other terrible sonnet that I recorded the video for, I talked about how at the end of that sonnet, he feels that death and sleep are the only relief from his torture. In this sonnet, the sense is that sleep, there is no sleep, there is no possibility of sleep because of the psychological and emotional trauma he's experiencing. So he wakes up in the middle of the night, and instead of feeling refreshed, he feels like he's in hell. I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day. Obviously, it's the title of the poem, and you're going to learn that title, and that's a quote that you can use. The juxtaposition of dark and day, capturing his experience of life, capturing a mood of gloom and a bleak and gloomy atmosphere. And then there's this sense of the unreal. He can't believe what he's going through. What hours, oh, what black hours we have spent this night. Look at the exclamation mark. When he says we, look at the use of oh, the exclamation oh. The intensity of emotion is so vivid. When he says we, who's he talking about? He's talking about himself and his soul. In the same way Kavanagh talks about we have tested and tasted too much lover in Advent. He's talking about his consciousness and his spiritual self. And he's been up all night. And during that time, he just can't believe where his mind has gone to. His mind has raced, and the terrible thoughts going through his mind, torturing him. What sights you, heart, saw, ways you went. The simplicity of those words, the monosyllabic quality of those words. Again, the use of the exclamation mark. He can't understand why his mind is doing this, why his mind is racing and he's thinking about awful things as he wakes up in the middle of the night. And he knows that, there's more torture to come, and more must in yet longer light's delay. There's another brilliant example of alliteration. It's a long time before the dawn comes. He knows that this torture, this sense of despair, these thoughts, these dark thoughts that are racing through his mind, there's only going to be more of them before the dawn. And of course you can delve down into that a little bit and think figuratively, and maybe he's not talking about a particular night when a day dawns. Maybe he's talking about the experience of depression, the experience of emotional trauma, of psychological distress, and how you're in the darkness and you don't know when the sun is going to rise and it's going to end. Really interesting. He says, with witness I speak this. I love the honesty. He's saying, look, I'm not making this up. I'm not supposing. I'm not imagining. This is my life. This is what happens to me. But where I say hours, I meant years, mean life. And look at that triad there, hours, years, and life. This is what his whole life is like. And then, for me, the first line that you really learn from the poem, of course, learn as much as you can. I'll put them into the quotes tests in the knowledge checks, is this line. And my lament is cries countless, cries like dead letters sent to him who lives, alas, away. The repetition of cries, pain, suffering is emphasized. Dead letters. A dead letter is a letter that's sent to an address, but the person who you're sending it to no longer lives at that address, so it bounces back. It's like an email that you send and it's the wrong email address and it bounces back at you. Do you know what the dead letters are? Do you know what the cries are? There is prayers. Remember how God's presence was such a reassurance, such a source of joy for him in the Windhover, in God's grandeur, in those poems, Spring, which celebrate the natural world and his religious faith. Look at him now. He feels abandoned by God. He feels just utterly alone, with no hope that God will come back and save him from his suffering. An incredible admission for a man whose whole life was built on his religious faith. And remember again, these poems weren't written necessarily to be published. Hopkins had very few poems published in his lifetime. These poems are exercises of art. They are beautiful pieces of art, but they are deeply, deeply personal accounts of his struggles. And in that sense, there's a power to them in their honesty and their directness. That is emphasized in the sestet when he says, I am gall, I am heartburn. Look at him personifying his sense of being, of no use, of no value, of being a source of pain, that the pain that he has comes from within. God's most deep decree, bitter would have me taste. Now look at that. Here you have him appealing to the gustatory sense. You'll see that word again in the word cloud and in the mind map. Sorry, in the knowledge check. There's that image of bitterness, and he says bitter because he's seeing that he feels that God has decided that he has to suffer. A decree is an order given by a powerful entity. God has decided that he must suffer. My taste was me, bones built in me, flesh filled, blood brimmed the curse. So what's the source, he thinks, of his pain? His source, the source of all this pain, all this suffering, all this torture, is his own frailty, his own weakness. God has cursed him, sentenced him to suffer with his own sense of self. Now, you're right when you hear that and you go, whoa, that's a guy who's really suffering here. There's a guy who's not, the logical mind, the rational mind is not intact. But doesn't it capture something in a very truthful way about the distress and the despair and the sense of being cut off and lost that Hopkins felt and that he records in this poem? I see the lost are like this. The lost are those who are condemned by God. He's in hell, he's saying. And their scourge to be as I am mine. They're sweating selves, but worse. There's this idea, a scourge is a punishment that God sends us to purgatory, to be scourged, to be purged, to be punished, to be washed clean of our sins, or to send us to hell as a punishment for our sins, where we are scourged with no possibility of redemption and ascension into heaven. Whatever your interpretation, here we have a poet at the very, very top of his game, describing with visceral, that means raw and troubling power, with visceral detail. His sense of himself as a man abandoned by God, cursed by God, and suffering in a way which is unimaginable unless you're a poet with the talent and the greatness of Gerard Manley Hopkins, who finds it within himself to capture those intangible emotions in a really fantastic piece of writing. I love Hopkins.